Good afternoon. Welcome to Committee of the Whole agenda for Wednesday, May 22nd, 2024. Town of East Gwillimbury Council Chambers. I'd like to call this meeting to order for the May 22nd, 2024 Committee of the Whole meeting, and welcome to everyone. Are there any declarations of interest from members of council? Seeing none, I will move on to our land acknowledgement statement. The town of East Gwillimbury recognizes and acknowledges the lands originally used and occupied by the First Peoples of the Williams Treaty, First Nation, and other Indigenous peoples. And on behalf of council, I thank them for their sharing this land. We also acknowledge the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation as East Gwillimbury's closest First Nation community and recognize the unique relationship the Chippewas have with the lands and the waters of these territories. They are the water protectors and environmental stewards of these lands, and we join them in this responsibility. I have some community announcements. This is National Public Works Week, and the theme is Advancing Quality of Life for All. Please join us as we acknowledge and celebrate the men and women in our Public Works Department who contribute to and enhance the quality of life in our communities. From keeping roads safe to ensuring safe driving, drinking water, to beautifying parks and trails, to managing and maintaining our facilities and assets. Our talented and dedicated team deliver a high standard of all services, ensuring that all residents enjoy a quality of life here in East Gwillimbury. On behalf of council and our residents, thank you for all that you do. Are there any announcements from members of council? Councillor, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Through you, Madam Mayor. There are a couple of announcements to make, and on May 29th, from 6:30 to 9 p.m., the Friends of the Library are having their author reading with the author Dan Needles right here in the council chambers, and I'm looking forward to that event. As well as on Sunday, May 26th, is the kickoff of the National Accessibility Week, and it's the run, walk, and roll that takes place at the Newmarket Commons, and there will also be a fundraising marathon on Sunday, May 26th. So I encourage everyone to participate if they are able, and we look forward to celebrating the National Accessibility Week next week. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other messages? I'm not seeing any.
Actually, sorry, Madam.
Oh, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I wasn't going to say anything, but I just wanted to expand on what Councillor Leahy was saying about the Accessibility Week starting. The run, walk, and roll that she's referring to is was started by our former councillor, Councillor Joe Persicini, and I know that was something that has very much touched my life growing up in Mount Albert Public School. We, as a team there, participated every year, and we fundraised in the community. And then later on in my life, I was doing fundraising for Easter Seals as well. And I got to actually go visit the camp where the funds were donated to. And you could really see how it was changing people's lives. And while we didn't field the team this year, I will be participating in raising funds as an individual. And I just wanted to make that call out to the legacy that Councillor Joe Persicini had started. And it's great to see it continue. So I just want to add that bit of context to it. So thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. We'll be watching for you out there on the weekend. Thank you. Are there any other comments? Not seeing any. I will move to deputations. There are no deputations today. Item F is presentations. There are no presentations today. We are now at item G, which is development services, with Councillor Roy-DiClemente in the chair.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We have a pretty healthy agenda this afternoon. The first being a Planning Branch Report DS 24-13, which was the zoning bylaw amendment and official plan amendment applications from Sharonvit Estates. Ms. Bégin, did you want to set this up for us, please? We had some pretty healthy discussion about it last time.
Yes, thank you to you, Madam Chair. And I note that our Manager of Planning, Victoria Moore, is here to speak to this report as well, should members of committee have any questions. But essentially, what you have before you is the amended report based on the feedback that we heard during the last meeting of committee. And so the recommendations and the proposed resolution have been amended. I'm certainly happy to entertain any questions that members of committee may have.
Thank you, Ms. Bégin. I neglected to ask for a mover before we brought this forward. Moved by Councillor Crone. Any further discussion? I think it kind of captured the essence of where we landed at our last meeting. Go ahead, Councillor Johns.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Roy-DiClemente. I feel like I have exhausted the comments at the last session when we did this, and I just wanted to thank staff for really receiving the feedback that was heard by all council members, by all committee members, and feedback into this. It was, I was very pleased and proud to see the comments that were made were summarized and put into this motion here today. And I'm happy to support the motion based on all the extensive work that staff has gone into it after receiving all of our feedback and comments. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Anything further? Seeing none, I'll call the vote. All those in favor? And that motion carries. Thank you. All right, the second item on our agenda is Development Services, a memorandum on our 2023 building activity, a year-end summary from our CBO. Ms. Bégin, do you have anything further to add?
Nothing further, but I note that our CBO is here. This report is a statutory requirement of annual activity, and Mr. Sonia is certainly available to speak to that report or answer any questions that members of the committee may have.
Okay, may I have a mover to receive? Moved by Councillor Foster. Any questions, members of committee? Seeing none, I guess the report was self-explanatory. All those in favor? And that motion is carried. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to get it right this time. So next item is Development Services Memorandum regarding a proposed site plan application for 235 Murray Leonard Lane. Councillor Johns, since this is in Ward 2, would you like to move this? Thank you. Ms. Bégin, did you want to set this up for us?
Thank you. And through you, Madam Chair, with your indulgence, I'd like to invite Pardis Yanshi, our planning tech, to provide a brief overview. What we'd like to do going forward, if it's the wish of council, is when we have these introductory memos, to have the planner on the file provide that introduction so that council becomes familiar with who the planner is, if they have any questions as the process unfolds. The introductory memos really serve the function of letting members of council know when we receive these applications for site plan. As you are aware, the review and approval authority is delegated to staff, but we want to ensure that council has a chance to engage with these applications and understand their intent. So I'll turn it over to Pardis to give you a bit of an overview.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Mayor, members of the council, and town staff in attendance. I'm here today to inform you about the new site plan application we received for 235 Moray Leonard Lane, located south of Queensville Sideroad and west of Leslie Street. This application submitted by York Catholic District School Board proposes the development of a Catholic elementary school with a capacity of 421 students. The application is currently in an initial phase. The first submission has been circulated and is under review by both internal departments and external agencies. Additionally, I would like to note that the applicant plans to commence the construction in October 2024 with the aim of completing the project by August 2026. I would be happy to answer any question regarding this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Members of committee, any questions? This is kind of our opportunity to provide any feedback on that site plan as it's been submitted by the school board. Okay, seeing none, I have a motion from Councillor Johns. All those in favor that we receive, and that motion is carried. Thank you very much. Second item is a proposed site plan application for 2156 Queensville Sideroad. And this, I think, is also a good news story. May I have a mover, please? A move by Councillor Crone. Ms. Bégin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to invite Nicole Schroeder, the planner on this file, to give an introduction to this exciting ICI application.
Take it away, Ms. Schroeder.
Good afternoon. I'm here to present the introductory memo for 2156 Queensville Sideroad. It is a new site plan application submitted by Mansfield Rebar Limited to the Development Services Planning Branch in April 2024. The subject property is located at 2156 Queensville Sideroad. It's north of Queensville Sideroad and west of Woodbine. Mansfield Rebar Limited, which currently operates in Richmond Hill, is proposing to develop and utilize the subject lands for manufacturing, fabrication, and distribution of steel products. The proposed development would generate approximately 200 on-site jobs once the third phase is completed, and an additional 600 off-site jobs that will be managed and paid for from this property. The town's manager of economic development, Brennan Kenny, has and will be providing support throughout the advanced EG program, as its development represents a significant new investment in East Gwillimbury. The purpose of the application is to facilitate the first phase of the proposed development, which consists of 3 buildings. Building A and Building C will both be industrial shell-type buildings, and Building B will be a 2-story office building. A new on-site sewage system is also proposed to service the proposed buildings. Access to the subject lands, including the 254 parking spaces, will be from Queensville Sideroad, and the eastern portion of the subject lands, as shown on the site plan, is considered the future phase and is not currently a part of this current application. Right now, currently, it has gone out for its first internal and as well as external agency review, and we're just currently receiving those comments back. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Members of committee, any comments? I've got Councillor Carruthers and Councillor Crone. It was like the wave over there.
Thank you very much. I'm looking at this and I'm seeing a water course through the middle of it, and I'm just wondering how that connects with our natural heritage. And I'm wondering, when these come forward, if we could have a map of our official plan showing that area so we can see what's actually on the official plan, because it's hard to go back and forth and not have it as part of the package. So maybe in the future we can look at that. Can you tell me how that water course is going to be protected, especially if there's on-site sewage?
Thank you, and through the chair to Councillor Carruthers. Again, it's at the preliminary stages, so the Conservation Authority is looking at it. At this point in time, they can't comment on natural heritage, but they will be definitely commenting on the water course running through there.
Thank you. Ms. Bégin, did you have anything further to add?
Yes, certainly. On this file, and this does date back a number of years, there's been, the file has evolved over time, and the property is zoned for the industrial use. The water course does present a challenge in terms of ensuring that adequate buffers are in place to protect that, but the proponents are very aware of that and have looked at a number of different options to be able to ensure that it remains protected as they develop. So in fact, they were considering a larger development initially, and looking at options to bridge the water course. This latest iteration is actually a more compressed development and will not, we understand, will not impact or impinge on the buffers, but that's all part of the technical review that will be ongoing as we review this file. So.
Thank you, Ms. Bégin. Further?
So I'm hearing you say that this has been in the works for a while, but I'm also reading the report, the application was submitted after July 1st, 2022. So there's been talks about this, but the application wasn't submitted until, okay, just wanted to double check that. And I'm also still trying to get a handle on the new legislation. When will we see this again? Because I have significant concerns about that natural area in the middle, on-site sewage, the fact that it's industry so close to a waterway. I would like to see more on this. Will it come back to us?
Ms. Beger?
Through you, Madam Chair, no, site plan approval is delegated to staff under the current legislation. So all of the technical reviews that ensure that the water courses are protected will happen, whether we engage our staff or rely on peer reviews that will make sure that we access the required technical expertise to ensure that that the property is, or that the water feature is protected as according to legislation.
Thank you. Councillor Crone.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you to our presenter. Thank you very much for your report. I'm very excited about the economic development opportunity, the investment in the town, and the jobs that will be created. I am aware, though, and I support what Councillor Carruthers says. I don't want the perfume of the economic development to overpower the risk or stench of environmental hazard. So, I know it's early days. Are there any other obstacles that you see to this application?
Thank you, and through the chair to Councillor Crone. At this point, no, it's too preliminary.
Okay, fair enough. I accept that. Have we sent letters out to the neighbors yet to let them know about the application? Have we had any concerns raised from neighboring parties?
Ms. Beger, I'm not sure that site plan is part of that, the legislative requirement to notify, and I don't think there are that many neighbors. Do you want to comment, please?
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. That and both points are correct. So when a site plan, if that's sort of the first entry point of an application, that already presumes that it lines up with our official plan and the zoning bylaw. So there is no requirement for a public meeting because it's already in accordance with what the plans and the zoning permits. So this is in alignment with the proposed industrial use, and we'll be reaching out to other agencies. As Nicole noted, the LSRCA can no longer comment on natural heritage, but we will be we're engaging with a peer reviewer to be able to provide us with input on that. There will also be input provided by the region and other entities as required. So.
Madam Chair, I appreciate the legislation and all that. Not quite what I asked, though. I wanted to know if the neighbors had, because many of the people in this town don't need to be asked to give their comments. They'll offer them up off the bat. So I was just wondering if we've heard anything from the neighbors.
Ms. Beger?
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. I mean, this is the first public acknowledgement of receipt of the application. We certainly welcome, and have the opportunity as the planner on the file or myself or anybody on the planning team if there are questions about it. But just recognizing that the site plan is in accordance with the official plan. So there questions and about the development are certainly welcome, but there is really there's no sort of legislated opportunity to provide input or to speak against the proposed development, if you will.
Because it's allowed as of right.
Exactly.
At this point, it conforms with the official plan, and it conforms with the zoning land use. So at this point, we're really just figuring out where the furniture goes.
That's correct.
Thank you.
I appreciate all that. We have not had any complaints from neighbors at this point, is all I'm asking. No. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, anything further? So I have a motion from Councillor Crone that we receive the memorandum. All those in favor? And that motion is carried. Thank you, Ms. Schroeder. Okay, our last item on the agenda, we're moving quickly this afternoon. The last item on our agenda is a memorandum regarding a proposed official plan amendment application for 18642 Leslie Street. May I have a motion to receive? Moved by Councillor Johns. Okay, Ms. Bégin, would you like to set this one up for us?
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair, I'd like to invite Janani Nagalin, who's our planner too, to speak to this. And by contrast to the last introductory memo, this one concerns an official plan amendment, which means that what is being proposed does not exactly align with what was envisioned in the official plan, and therefore, in order to proceed with something that differs from what was set out in the official plan, you need to go through the official plan amendment process. You'll see a similar approach if there was a zoning bylaw amendment. It means that something is being envisioned that is outside of what was originally outlined within the zoning bylaw. So, Janani, maybe you can speak a little bit more about this application.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Councillors. I am introducing an official plan amendment application for the property at 8642 Leslie Street. That was received in April of 2024. The development proposal itself is for one stacked triplex that is proposed on the southeast corner of the property, 18 stacked duplexes, and to retain the heritage dwelling on the property to be used for mixed use. So there's proposed to be 40 units on the property. The proposed proposed amendment is to add site-specific provisions, to the village core designation. These three site-specific provisions are to permit a standalone residential uses, permitting mixed use or live-work within the retained heritage dwelling, and then to permit the density of 92 units per hectare on the subject property, where the current official plan allows for 32 units per hectare. The application is currently in circulation for comments, and we are receiving them, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. So this is an introductory memo. There's a process with a public meeting to follow. So that's really at that point where we would be receiving comments from the public, and there is a notification period.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Members of committee, any comments at this time? Councillor Johns.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Early on, I met with the proponents, seeing as that this is within our ward, and I strongly encourage them to look at what the existing use is with the heritage building, and the opportunity to be able to really kind of protect our history within the village core, and being able to recognize the opportunity to increase density along the transit route that is there on Leslie Street. And so when I saw this come forward, I was very pleased to see that protecting the heritage building for uses going forward. And the fact is that we are in this housing crisis, and when wastewater does become viable solution within this municipality, it's going to be great to see the increased density along the corridor. I think it's a great spot for it, and really will bring more people to our village core. So I was very happy to see this come forward. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Anything further? Councillor Leahy, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, through you, Madam Chair. So I have a question and a concern. My concern is, and I understand that it might not be at this stage of the process to address it, but I would like to give everybody the heads up and perhaps nip in the bud a potential problem that we have learned our lesson from in another development, and that is the design of the hammerhead design, where there is potential limitations on a garbage pickup, and the future residents would not have access to garbage pickup, which is a serious challenge. So I would like to bring it to your attention, and I'm wondering if there is a way to communicate that potential issue to the designers of the subdivision.
Ms. Bégin.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. Certainly, those and other comments of a technical nature will be relayed to the applicant. We're conscious of, at this stage, and noting that there is a public meeting planned, that it's not appropriate to be providing comment that might sort of prejudice the outcome of a public meeting at this point. So that all of the technical review will follow. At this point, we're really just announcing that this is the application, and certainly recognize that not just from an engineering and waste perspective, there's also fire, there's, you know, there myriad other issues that will need to be addressed to the satisfaction of the various technical experts to make sure that it's a viable. So it's I guess I'm just want to make clear that we don't want to presume, or at this stage, it's really just to make you aware, we're not providing comment very much intentionally in terms of whether or not we feel there are technical issues to be resolved or whether an application will be successful. It's really just that here is the application kind of thing at this stage. So.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Carruthers and then Councillor Cronin. I will again reiterate, this is an introductory process, and so we don't want to be prejudicing. Everyone is, any landowner is allowed to make an application, and so that's what they've done. Go ahead.
Thank you. Keeping that in mind, my comment is the same as on the last one. If, when we get these reports, especially when it has to do with an official plan amendment, if we just get a map of the official plan for that area. Thank you.
Go ahead, Councillor Cronin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think Councillor Leahy, I think, raised a good point about the hammerhead. I see Mr. Molinari nodding his head. My question, though, is the setup of the development. Is it going to be like a condo, or is it? Do we know what their setup is at this point? No. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So I've got a motion from Councillor Johns. Any further questions? All those in favor? And that motion is carried. Thank you. That brings us to the end of our prepared agenda for development services. Ms. Bégin, did you have anything further to raise at this time?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Nothing further at this time.
Okay. And I'll turn the chair back to you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you very much. We are now on item H with the agenda and myself and the chair. Legal Legislative Services Report LLS 2024-04, New Governance Framework for Statutory and Advisory Committee. Could I have a mover, please? Councillor Crone, thank you. Could I call on General Manager Ingram, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you, Madam Mayor, I wish to provide a brief overview of the report in front of committee today with respect to the advisory committees. This report has been a little time in the making, and I thank you for your patience in me returning with the report. If I can, I will provide you a little bit of a summary with respect to what's in the report, and then I'm very happy to answer any questions. So what the report does in essence is it introduces a potential new governance framework for our advisory committees and our groups. So to refresh everyone's memory, we have 4 categories of committees and groups. If I would refer the council to page 3 of the report, the 4 categories are set out there. Firstly, you have your statutory committees, which basically are required through legislation to be configured by the town. So those are not being changed in any way by the new governance structure that's being proposed. The second category are those comprising what we call advisory committees, and there are 7 of them currently in place right now, which are listed there on page 3. There are no proposed changes to those committees at the current time in this report. The third category comprises what we call at the town working groups, and those have some recommended changes to them in the report, which I will go through in a moment. And finally, the fourth category comprises what we refer to as our community groups. And there are some proposed changes to that category. The reason for proposing the new governance structure is based upon a couple of key reasons. One of the reasons is due to a fairly significant change that was made in the Municipal Act in 2019, which basically said that any committee members or people that are appointed to these committees by council, so by this council, those members of those committees and groups are subject to what we call the transparency rules under the Municipal Act. So the result is that things like conflicts of interest have to be declared in the meetings. The Integrity Commissioner can investigate complaints against those members of committees. And I suspect that many of the volunteers that sit on these committees and that council appoints to those positions were probably unaware at the time that they would be subject to these sort of rigorous requirements under legislation with respect to the conduct and how they conduct themselves in these meetings and these committees. So that was one significant change that gave rise to a suggestion that maybe we need to reconsider how these committees operate. The second reason is that there was some efforts made years ago, and basically around the same time the Municipal Act was changed. The former municipal clerk that was employed here brought forward a pretty solid report based upon some changes that he was recommending to the committees and the governance of those committees, and there was certainly some progress made with respect to that work that was undertaken by him, but it looked like it just stopped short of the mark for whatever reason. So coming back to you now, it's based upon the fact that it may be timely to have another look at the committee structure. In my speaking notes, I might say that refer to these as committees, but I'm referring to them as generally committees and groups. So if I say committees, I'm incorporating groups into the mix, but I'll try to make that clear. So in early 2023, having had some understanding myself that council members of this council wish to staff to have another look at the committees and the groups. The process got underway again to have another recent look at these groups, and a series of meetings were staged with between clerks and myself and members of council, at which we received your feedback, and we heard some of the concerns, some of the issues that this council thought significant enough to bring those matters to our attention. The themes that we heard in those meetings and which we were trying to address in this report had the following in mind. We heard that there were too many groups and committees. We heard that there was a lot of staff time involved in managing the groups and committees. There was confusion around the mandates of the committees, there was some confusion in terms of the role of a staff liaison and a role of a council liaison, and that those roles were not well defined and could use some, perhaps some addressing. We also heard, and this is, these are not necessarily by all council members, by just, these are some of the emerging themes. We also heard that perhaps the advisory committees had moved away from the essence of what was understood to be an advisory committee, maybe in the early days of these things, which was to provide advice to council on matters that council wished to have the advice of a committee on, and that they had migrated into broader mandates. We also heard that the governance and the conduct of meetings were not consistent across all these groups and committees. The report back was inconsistent and perhaps needed to be better defined. We heard that the budget process or the funding of the committees was maybe needing a little bit of addressing as well. And finally, we heard a theme that perhaps the town, as all towns do, they mature in their organizational structure internally and the people that they hire, and that perhaps where once we relied upon the strength of our volunteer community, which we heard was pretty phenomenal. We once relied on that strength to help us deliver programs. With the maturing of this organization internally from a staff perspective, perhaps there was a reason to look at some of the groups and committees to see if they were they would continue to be necessary to deliver those programs that we once relied on them to provide. So those give you a sense of the emerging themes. I know you'll have lots of questions about this report, but before I finish my introductory remarks to open up the floor to the myriad of questions, perhaps I might walk us through the recommendations. I'll give you some thinking in terms of how the recommendations were arrived at. Some of it is in the report, some of it won't be in the report, but it'll give you a sense of the thinking behind how the recommendations were arrived at. So if I could ask Mr. Walkham if he could bring up the recommendations on the screen, please. Thank you very much. So this report provides you with a policy, a draft policy. It's certainly not in final form, and that's the beauty of bringing these things to committee, is that we have lots more opportunity to talk about whether or not staff have hit the mark squarely on its head in terms of understanding the concerns that council has expressed and addressing them appropriately and adequately. So the policy is a draft policy, and when I said that significant progress had been made by the previous clerk in 2019, but it just stopped a little bit short, what I meant was it stopped short of introducing a policy and a policy framework which would basically give some structure to how committees and groups are, governed, how they're formed, where they're needed, when they would be thought to be needed. So the policy is designed to put a little structure around that, and I think that was something that didn't get forwarded to council at that time in 2019, although it might have been in the works, I'm not sure. But this policy is certainly just a starting point. It's not a finishing point. It's meant to be a draft for you to review and for us to come back in an appropriate time, whether that's in 2 weeks, that might be too fast, but that's the beauty of being at committee. The policy is in front of you now, and if there's need to have more discussion, then we certainly will be doing that. So there's no urgency of anything today on this file, but there had been some questions about bringing it back, and certainly we didn't want to delay it much further from the meetings that we held with members of council earlier, last year, in fact. The third recommendation, number 3, and there's some deliberation in terms of the fact that these things would not become effective this year. There was some thought to, some of these things are going to need to be discussed with people. I know this is out in the public forum, so this is the first point that, some of the groups and committees might be hearing about this, and it's certainly not meant to alarm anybody in terms of that. It's certainly just to table it. It's in the public forum right now. But again, it's not something that was recommended to be happening today. The report is based upon looking at the community groups, the Holland Landing, North Union, Queensville, Sharon, and River Drive Park community groups, and the way they operate, and suggesting the proposal is to, and this is deliberate again, looking at how the groups have operated in practice. They, as I understood it from the discussions that we've had with you, with council members and with staff who've been here a long time, what I understood was that the groups function very, very effectively. Yes, we appoint volunteers to them. Do they require committee and council to appoint volunteers to them when they operate effectively as community groups in their communities in which they reside? So the affiliated model, which is under this recommendation number 3, which is to move to an arm's length affiliated model, was striking a balance between this transparency and accountability framework that the legislation imposed upon volunteers, striking that balance with the understanding that these groups worked very effectively well before the legislation was changed, and they continue to work very effectively now. And thus, operationally, it looked like it was a plus on their side of the ledger for removing this accountability framework from the volunteers that wish to participate in those community groups. The fourth recommendation is with respect to the farmers market working group. And this relates to an issue in terms of next year's farmers market and not this year's. 2024 farmers market is already underway. The recommendation to move the farmers market to an event that would be housed within the Aaron Karmazin GM-led area is based upon a couple of reasons. The event strategy, which is also on your docket to come forward sometime this year, is relevant to the recommendations that were made in this report. The event strategy will be speaking to how the town wishes to go forward in delivering events that are important to residents and also important to the strategic priorities of council. And that's the balance one has to sort of take into account when this recommendation was framed. The Farmers Market Working Group is a group of volunteers which has over time led to fewer and fewer volunteers for the farmers market. But I understand that the farmers market is quite a lengthy obligation to volunteer for. It's over a period of 4 months, as I understand it, or probably longer. So it's probably harder and harder to attract volunteers. So that was factored in to moving this over to the delivery internally. Recommendation 5, this one has to do with the Santa Claus Parade. Similar reasoning for the Santa Claus Parade. It's an event that perhaps might be thought to be delivered within the organization, whereas if it continues in a working group scenario, we go back to that transparency issue. Number 6, this is the one that deals with something that was to be brought forward sooner than later. And the reasons are set out in the report, but I would suggest that the reason why these groups were suggested to be retired at this point had to do with there was, in terms of the seniors working group, there's an affiliated group called 55 Plus, which is a group of which has appeared to have the same sort of mandate to deliver events for people of a certain age category and up. And that group works quite well, and so there might be some redundancy to have one internally. The second broadband working group, that group has perhaps been subsumed by internal staff who have the expertise internally to address that. And the Road Watch working group, which perhaps has been subsumed by a Road Watch that's run by our YRP folks. So that was the only immediate thing pretty much on this agenda for in terms of what happens to these groups. But again, nothing turns on it today, nothing needs to turn on it in 2 weeks or 2 months or 2 years. It's just, these are recommendations to put forward for your consideration. And finally, number 7, what we heard in these meetings was that our terms of reference for each of the committees and groups were somewhat inconsistent, and we could benefit from bringing some form of a template forward to ensure that the consistency is addressed. and thus, in front of in your package, you'll find a proposed template, terms of reference, but the real work isn't in the template. It's actually in the work to address each of the committees and groups that will need a template in the future. So with those very fulsome opening remarks, I will cease now and hope to address some of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there questions for Councillor Crone? Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you to Janice. Really appreciate all the work you put into this, and for hanging in there. This was this was a long one. You mentioned that I think members of council met with you last year, and I'm going to confess I've forgotten what was the original problem we were solving for here. What was the impetus for all this? If you could just, I think that's probably a good starting point.
Thank you for the question, and through you, Madam Mayor. I had to think back as well. I joined the town in mid-2022. I think I'm coming up a couple years on my time here. Hopefully it won't be the end of my time here with this report, but it's funny because when one first arrives at a new organization, you hope to help where you can, and you don't really expect to know what you will be helping out with or where you will land when you start your work with a new organization. And what happened was I had some questions about these committees and groups, and I jumped into the fray thinking I could resolve the problems initially, and then realizing how complex these issues are, and so that was my fault in not realizing how complicated the issues are, and that is part of the reason why it's taken so long to come back with a framework or a proposed framework, and even so, I'm certain I'm not landed on it today. So so there was a lot of questions sent my way, and that's why I thought I could make a difference and make some changes. But I have learned that it's very complex. There's a lot of people involved. There's a lot of there's a lot of factors you have to consider, not just the legislation. The legislation really did throw some curveballs at these committees and groups, because I don't think any volunteers expected that they would be subject to perhaps investigations from an integrity commissioner. Years ago, nobody actually had heard about an integrity commissioner until all these changes to the Municipal Act were made, and somehow they seem to encompass in that big wide net of transparency and accountability. They encompass the work of volunteers, and so I think the sands shifted quite a bit. And it's taken some time for towns and municipalities to grapple with the issue. So there have been other, municipalities that have moved to reduce the number of committees and groups because of that issue. So that the legislation was part of it, but also there were just a lot of questions about sort of how they're governed and what their purpose is. And so there were, some of these high overarching issues, and then there were governance concerns.
Okay, through you, Madam Mayor, thank you for that. That is a good refresher, and appreciate you grabbing the bull by the horns on this one. There was a reference you made in respect to the community groups about making them arm's length. Could you give us a little more detail around that? Because I want to know, and being the recovering insurance guy in the group, I want to make sure that they would still be covered being arm's length doesn't mean that they're no longer covered by our town insurance policy, so should something bad happen? Or do you think that they would need to get directors and officers insurance? But maybe give us a little more of a fulsome explanation of what arm's length means to you.
Yes, thank you for the question, and through you, Madam Mayor. The arm's length is intentionally in there, and that is because right now, when committee or when council appoints the volunteers to these committees and groups, they are, yes, they're not really arm's length, are they? They are, when one refers to arm's length, one thinks about the fact that there is a distinction in law between what they do and what the town may be responsible for. So when they're arm's length, the liability does not rest with the town, it rests with the arm's length organization. So moving to the arm's length model does one thing. It does certainly change the liability structure, for sure. And so those volunteers or the directors and officers of those organizations, they need to get their own liability insurance for, and whether or not they do at this point, I have no idea. I don't know the answer to that, but moving away from the town in terms of appointing their members will definitely give rise to that question at their end. Operationally, however, it doesn't necessarily mean that the town is not still able to provide them with some support like they always have. And that's a conversation for another day, but it doesn't mean that when they are arm's length that we can't work with them, provide them with in-kind services. That doesn't change, that doesn't affect that discussion. That can continue if it's the will of the council to do that.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just have a couple more. Just appreciate your indulgence. I'd like to hear from Mr. Karmazin, if I might, through you, Madam Mayor. You're being tasked with taking on the Santa Claus Parade and the farmers market. Do you feel that your department has the resources and the professional bandwidth to accommodate that request?
Through you, Madam Mayor and Madam Chair, our staff is fully engaged operationally with these events and initiatives, and we do have the capacity if it's council's direction. One thing we will do is we do depend on volunteers for both these events and initiatives, and we would continue that community involvement through volunteer opportunities, in particular through our Engaged EG volunteer program. Our staff does not have the capacity on its own to carry out these events and initiatives. We do rely upon our volunteers very heavily, and that's no different than the current configuration with the working group. We do have a number of volunteers that we do bring on throughout the year. This would put the ownership and operation solely within Parks and Rec and with the town.
Thank you, through you, Madam Mayor. Thank you for that. I just want to be mindful and respectful. I know you folks work really hard for us, and just wanted to make sure you were okay with that. Last question, and then I'll let someone else go ahead. I think it's important that residents know that this is the starting, very much a starting point for the conversation, and that we'll continue to refine this as we go forward. I've listed, I've already brought up some concerns that I have. I think we need to have more discussions about it. I'd like to get the members, the volunteers of the community groups involved and get their feedback. for instance, with the broadband group that I'm the council liaison to, I'm not sure we're ready to hold up the mission accomplished banner yet. So I would obviously want to talk to the committee about that, talk to staff who are liaised to it as well, to see where we're at before we make any of those decisions. But I just hope we can continue the conversation on with all the stakeholders involved, and that it's not just a conversation between staff and council. Thank you very much. I am now done. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you very much. Councillor Carruthers, go ahead, please.
Thank you, and thank you for all the work that's been put into this. I recognize there's been a lot of work put into it, and I also understand how difficult it is when you don't have the history with the committees and you haven't been at the committee meetings knowing what they're about. The farmers market committee doesn't run the farmers market. They provide advice to the market manager for 1 hour a month throughout the year. It's the Engage EG that actually shows up at the farmers market and helps with running the event. So the reason for a lack of volunteers has nothing to do with the workload on it. It has more to do with the market had lost direction for a while. Now we feel like we've got it back on the right track. The farmers market is also supposed to be self-sustaining, that when it was originally introduced. So it had originally been funded through the mayor and council. Now we've moved that funding into Parks and Rec, and we still want to make sure that it ends up being self-funding. So I think there's a little bit of history that might be missing on some of this. The community groups are not all the same. Some of them are brand new. The Holland Landing Community Group, the Queensville Sharon Community Group, others have been around forever, North Union, River Drive Park. The last two both have their own community center. The other two do not. So they're very, very different. And even after listening to the explanation about what affiliated model arm's length means, I still don't feel that I have enough information to take that back to the group and let them know what that means for them. So I would suggest that one almost needs its own report, because what we mean by affiliated model or arm's length, the devil's in the details. Like before passing a resolution to move them to arm's length affiliation, I need to know what that means, and I don't feel, even with the explanation, that I do. I would suggest that today we receive the report, but the other recommendations are tabled for a future meeting after, as Councillor Cronin mentioned, meeting with some of these groups. Seniors, for instance, it's not just 55 and up, and I would hate for it to be out there that the only seniors group is 55 and up. Golden Anchor is the Holland Landing group, and they should be on equal footing with 55 and up. They run out of the Holland Landing Community Center, and they're an important seniors group. So I just want to make sure that we've got all the history right before we move too far ahead on this. Back to Councillor Cronin's question about what is the problem that we're solving for. I thought the problem that we were solving for was consistency amongst the groups. So in the time that I've been on council, we have some groups that consistently provide advice to council. We have other groups that I've never heard from the whole time I've been on council. We want to make sure that we're getting good value for our tax dollar. If we're moving to a model where it is only advice to council, then I'm not sure that we need the $2,000 in funding. So we need to be thinking about that. We need to be making good use of the residents who want to come forward and help. We have some with some subject matter expertise, some with just interest in various areas, and we need to be able to make sure that we're making good use of that. So there's things in the report that I agree with 100%, other ones I have questions on, and some that are a hard no for me. And one of those would be limiting the advice that advisory committees provide to us as only matters in response to questions raised by council. I think we end up spending so much time here trying to figure out what advice that we want. If we want advice on something in particular, then I would say we want subject matter experts, which are not volunteers, which are hiring a consultant. I think how I've always viewed our advisory committees is kind of having our blind spot, that if there is something that we should be considering on our trails, on the environment, on broadband, they're the ones that are going to provide advice to us on that. And it's not us reaching out to them, it's them reaching out to us saying, hey, have you considered this? So I do think that limits it, and it's going to be very burdensome for all of us to agree exactly what we're tasking these advisory committees with. And I don't think that's really where we want to go. I also take exception to the piece about applications being the sole discretion of the clerk. Council has complained about the application process, and there hasn't been a response to that. These are council committees, so I think it's council's sole discretion how the application process would work. Councillor Leahy quite rightly brought up about the attrition from the committees, and I've been contemplating that, and I would say some of them are because of the application process, that people got an alert on their Indeed and checked it off without really knowing what they were getting themselves into. And as much as we try and tease that out in the interviews, it's not always obvious, and I think that we're getting some attrition due to that. So I'll go with what Councillor Crone has suggested, that we go back to these committees and talk to them to get a better understanding, and then maybe a separate report, like maybe chunk down these into a little bit of a separate report, one being particular on the arm's length community groups, another one on moving the farmers market and Santa Claus parade into CPRC, and then another one on the terms of reference. So maybe we can just chunk it down a little bit. So, Madam Mayor, when we get to the vote on this, I'd like to separate out so we can vote on receipt and maybe table the rest, if it's the will of the rest of the table.
Thank you. Councillor Leahy, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, through you, Madam Mayor. I have several concerns and suggestions, and which will require further discussion. My first being that it is intended to limit providing advice to council. With regard to the Arts and Culture Advisory Committee specifically, this may result in some unintended consequences if we remove the volunteers' ability to be physically participating in making ideas come to fruition. For example, I understand that the Parks manager stated that it would be the engaged EG volunteers who help implement this advice and at events. But who would be doing the work of hanging the public art that hangs in our hallways of our civic center? Who would be coordinating murals and to be unveiled, etc., like at the farmers market? And who would be selling the paddles at the paddle project? At the farmers market. And so one critical issue that has not been raised and was not addressed in the report was, where do the funds go that these groups have raised and continue to raise on an ongoing basis? And where will those funds go as of January 1st, 2025? I'm concerned about for example, the Arts and Culture Advisory Committee raises funds and then donated them to the Mayor's and Community Initiative Fund. And so where will those funds go, and where will the funds go that have already been raised to date? And if their funds are going to be, that are raised by committees, are going to be given to charities, should there be an approved list of charities that those funds go to, rather than having the committees themselves making decisions about where the funds raised go? So I think that monetary component is a critical one that needs to be addressed, because they do lots of good work, including some committees raising money for the town and charities. I have 3 points that I made note of that I'd like to just put forward. We don't necessarily have to discuss them now, but they need to be addressed in the future. And that is 5.8.1, which is when I believe when someone steps down from a committee for whatever reason, that there should be a process in place, whether it's a survey or whether it's an interview conducted to find out the reasons why the person is stepping away from their commitment to a committee. And 5.8.3 states that nothing precludes the appointment of the same individual as council liaison and for a subsequent term term. And I think that if the President of the United States is limited to 2 terms of running a country, I think we should consider having a maximum number of terms that the same council liaison can serve as. I think it's always healthy to have new input and new perspectives. So I think 8 years would be more than fulsome in terms of the length of that council liaison serves on one particular committee. And as well as 5.9, conduct of members that they need to familiarize themselves and comply with the code of conduct. And I think it needs to go and be even more clear and go further, that there be a document, a written document that is signed by the volunteer so that they are attesting to the fact that they have familiarized themselves with the code of conduct and they do intend to comply with it, so that if there is ever any unfortunate incident that the town has the ability to follow through with a signed document. So that needs to be considered as well. Thank you.
Other questions? Go ahead, please.
Thank you. I'll try and keep my comments brief. I think there's a couple of sort of large issues, one being the community groups. I think we need to put some more meat on the bones as far as what arm's length means. It's not just about insurance, that's a huge part of it, but it's also about whether or not we allow our facilities to be rented for them free of charge. What happens to their funding? Some of them rely on the town's funding in order to be able to operate. So from that perspective, I think we need to have a bit more information before we go back to those committees and let them know of this discussion. For me, the advisory committees, many of them were set up, and I'll use EDAC and Trails as examples. They were set up in a time when the town lacked the maturity, in the sense that we didn't have staff who built trails. We had volunteers who built the trails and who shifted into an advisory role when we created the Active Transportation and Trails Master Plan. So the need for an advisory committee shifted into more of an advocacy role. Same thing goes for our Economic Development Advisory Committee. They were formed at a time when we didn't have staff doing economic development work for us. And so it became a question of, we need subject matter experts who are within our communities who can advise council on these matters, because we didn't have the staff to do those things. So from my perspective, I think we need to have that hard, and it's a very difficult conversation to have, because none of us wants volunteers to feel like their contributions haven't been valued and worthwhile, but are we able to provide them with a meaningful experience, and do they feel like they are making a difference? And I think that's something that we need to that we're going to struggle with. I am having been on the Santa Claus Parade working group, I'm fine. I've seen that mature as well, where we've had staff who are actually who are better positioned than volunteers to run, particularly since things like YRP and road closures are much more stringent, and they're technical. They're not a well-meaning volunteer in a safety vest is not going to be able to effectively close a road anymore. That's what they used to be able to do. They can't do that anymore. Mr. Sanderson would know that. So the other thing I wanted to comment on was the farmers market working group. The idea was that it was supposed to be self-sustaining, and when I believe it opened in 2009, maybe 2010, so we've got 14 or 15 years of that particular organization still needing the town's training wheels. And I've had significant experience with other markets across the province because of my personal side of things, and I don't know any other market that is run by a municipality. It is usually a very tight group of well-meaning volunteers or a BIA, but it is not the town that runs a farmers market. And if our farmers market still needs our support after 15 years, we need to have a good hard look at what that structure is and whether or not we should be continuing to have it. Again, it's a really difficult conversation to have, but are we, I believe in having a market, but if our market is not able to support itself, then we need to have a look at how it's structured and how it's run. So I'll leave that there. I'm happy to receive and to continue to have those conversations. My big worry is about our working group or the community groups that are trying to build community, and I feel like we run the risk of maybe cutting them off at the knees without, and losing some of those events, particularly as the two younger groups try to establish themselves post-COVID, because they got started and had some good ideas, and then COVID happened and they weren't able to do anything. And so there's some challenges there given their maturity. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Other questions, comments? I'm not seeing any at this time. We have before us a resolution, be it resolved that Legal and Legislative Services Report LLS 2024-04 dated May 22, 2024, entitled The Governance Framework for Statutory Advisory Committees be received, and that the town adopt the Statutory and Advisory Committee policy, the policy, in the form or substantially in the form set out in Appendix A, and that effective January 1st, 2020.
Point of order. I'd asked if that could be separated, so we just want to vote on just the first one, I believe.
Where would you like it?
Just to receive,
Just to receive.
yeah.
And the one that I was going to, you would want to have that after?
I won't be supporting those. I'm not sure if others will be.
Okay, so let's do the ones that we have.
Madam Mayor, since it was my, I moved it, why don't we just move to receive and then we strike the rest? If everyone else is
I'm seeing.
fine with that?
I'm seeing nods. Go ahead, please.
I'm fine to receive, but I don't want to just lose track of this conversation. I think there are some worthwhile recommendations here that I think we do want to implement, and others that we have questions about. So I would prefer that we had a second resolution, that a second clause perhaps, that we direct staff to, I don't know where we
Continue
want
the
to go.
conversation.
I mean, that's ultimately what it comes down to, is that we need clarification on a few matters with respect to the working groups and the community groups. I think that's what it comes down to. So maybe it's a further memorandum on the structure of how it would be envisioned for the community groups to continue to operate at arm's length. What does that structure look like?
Are you suggesting that it come back again, or working with what we have in front of us now?
I think we've landed on the reason why Ms. Ingram identified that the 2019 report stopped short, and that's because it's a tough conversation to have. And I don't want us to lose track of having that conversation.
Councillor Crothers, go ahead, please.
Perhaps we can have staff incorporate council feedback and report back. Would that summarize everything? I think there was more than just the community groups.
Councillor Hay, go ahead, please.
Through you, Madam Mayor, there needs to be some structure or next steps, I believe, set in writing in terms of if we are going to go back to our respective committees and working groups and have conversations with them. How does that look? What is the timeline around following up? And so that needs to be addressed in terms of how that structure around the follow-up with the individual committees and groups is going to take place.
Okay. Go ahead, please.
Through you, Madam Mayor, just having a quick discussion, possibly a workshop for council would be helpful to lay out some opportunities and provide some additional information, and then receive some feedback on some next steps. Just offer that for council's consideration.
I like that idea. I think there's an opportunity to talk to the people face to face as opposed to sending out a letter or however we're going to do it. I think there's a way of massaging this. Councillor Leahy?
Thank you, through you, Madam Mayor. I, in fact, don't think that that might be necessarily the most efficient way to proceed in terms of the timeline and the timelines that were put in this original document of January 1st, 2025. So I would suggest that we phrase it so that we have a timeline to go back to our committees and groups, have discussions, and then council members can, maybe there's a structure of having appointments again, because it was 14 months ago that we had our initial conversations with our town solicitor and town clerk. So now that 14 months have gone by and we need to get some feedback from our groups and committees, perhaps we could each go through another meeting with the town solicitor and clerk in order to tighten up the document before it comes before us again for voting on.
I see we have our CAO on with us today. You have comment for us, please?
Madam Mayor, just one other comment. I do believe that based on the dialogue this afternoon, receipt only is very appropriate. Some further outreach with members of council, I think, would be well advised. And the other thing I was going to suggest, perhaps moving forward, I don't know if now is the appropriate time, but we introduced a council subcommittee to review the mayor and council budget, and it worked really well the last year or two. It seems to me with something like advisory committees and working groups, which are really there to directly support, advise council in your various aspects of decision-making and community programming and so on, it may be advisable in the future to set up a council subcommittee that would work with the staff group to assess this important matter. And I think that would ensure that the subcommittee would come back with its own recommendations to council to suggest what it would like from its advisory committees, its working groups, and so on. Because from staff's perspective, we're really trying to facilitate this to ensure that those groups are working in their best capacity to support all of you. And so I just wonder whether what we did through the budget process, which I thought worked really well in dealing with the mayor and council portion of the budget, could also be applied as a model for reviewing this and bringing back, recommendations for change, if any. So it's just some food for thought.
Thank you very much. Other comments, questions?
Madam Mayor, I'm happy to amend my original motion to that effect, as suggested by Mr. Velchich.
Thank you. Mr. Clerk, do you have that?
Madam Mayor, just a moment, and I'll try to prepare a draft.
Thank you. Go ahead, please.
Sorry, Madam Mayor, and I apologize. I didn't intend to have discussion on the side, and I was looking for clarification on the committee structure, recognizing that you're leading that discussion. Would you be appointing the people to serve on that committee, or is this body suggesting who would be serving? And I am okay with whatever. I was just looking for clarification on the logistics.
I'm not sure at this point. Perhaps, Mr. Velchik, did you have anything to add to this?
I don't recall what the process was whereby members were identified to review and make recommendations on the mayor and council budget portion. So perhaps whatever that process was, a similar one could be used to identify 2 or 3 members that would have a couple of meetings with staff, work directly, and then be part of bringing back ultimately those recommendations for committee consideration and ultimately council approval. But I must admit, I don't recall. Perhaps Mr. Marshall recalls what process was used, but I don't recall exactly how those subcommittee members were selected.
Thank you very much. Mr. Marshall, go ahead, please.
Through you, Madam Mayor. The past couple budget subcommittees were, the council members were appointed by your office.
Did you, Mr. Velchuk, did you hear that?
Madam Mayor, the reason I mention it is if that worked for the budget review process, if in fact committee believes that a subcommittee, would be useful in this case, I think it might be, then you could consider a similar process to pull together 2 or 3 members of council committee that would work with staff and bring this back jointly to a future meeting.
Thank you. I have a motion from Councillor Crone, be it resolved that Legal and Legislative Services Report, LLS 2024-04, dated May 22, 2024, entitled New Governance Framework for Statutory and Advisory Committees be received, and that Council refer Legal and Legislative Services Report, LLS 2024-04 to the Mayor and Council Subcommittee for further review. Questions? Councillor Roy-DiClemente, go ahead, please.
Thank you. Can we have it referred to a Mayor and Council Subcommittee? Because I don't think we have one. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Any other comments? Questions? Call the vote. All those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you. Now, Mr. Clerk. We'll move along to the next item. Councillor Crone's in the chair. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We have one item on the Parks and Recreation and Culture agenda here today. It is the Parks, Recreation and Culture Memo Memorial Bench Donation, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, York Region. Mr. Karmazin, would you be able to give us a few more details on this, please?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. This is a memo to inform council that staff have worked with Mothers Against Drunk Driving York Region to identify and select a location for a bench dedication. Staff reviewed locations in each of our communities. MAD, York Region, had preferred and selected the location at the East Gwillimbury Sports Complex, as this is our busiest facility currently within town for programs and permits, and this could leverage exposure for their organization and the partnership with the town. Mothers Against Drunk Driving York Region has confirmed that additional bench locations, dedication locations, can occur at other community locations in town in the future, and staff plan to review these opportunities with MAD annually. Happy to answer any questions related to the memo prepared for council.
Thank you, Mr. Karmazin. Could I have a mover for this, please? Councillor Foster. Are there any questions? Councillor Roy-DiClemente, please go ahead.
Thank you. I was not in attendance at that deputation. I certainly support this initiative, and I just wanted to reiterate an initiative that I had been forwarding, that I forwarded to Mr. Karmazin in the past about it's an interesting thing. It's called a spirit phone. And what it is it's a phone that you place in a quiet place, like at the end of a trail or in a place of quiet contemplation, where somebody who is going through grief process can speak to their loved ones. And I think, I know that Oasis, which is one of our other local area groups, was keen to partner with the town, and I see some alignments here with MAD. And so if there's a way for our staff to collaborate with those two organizations, I think that would also be very well received in our community. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Karmazin?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we have had initial dialogue with the Wind Phone, Spirit Phone representatives, and we've requested that they come forward at a future council meeting to provide council with a proposal to include a Wind Phone or Spirit Phone at a town location, and we'll seek to do that at a future council meeting.
Thank you for that. I know Oasis does a lot of great work in our community, so that's good news. Are there any other questions about this? Okay, seeing none, I'll call the vote. All those in favor? And motion is carried. Mr. Carmison, do you have anything else you would like to share with committee?
Through you, Mr. Chair, nothing further at this time. Thank you.
Any questions from committee for Mr. Carmison? Seeing none, I will pass the chair back to you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you very much. We're under J for administration with myself in the chair. I understand CAO Velchik, who is joining us virtually, has a verbal update to share. Is that correct?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, with your permission, very brief one. At a recent committee meeting, it was reported that you had recently had a meeting with the CEO of Southlake Hospital, and at that meeting, I indicated that I was also going to be meeting with staff at Southlake in the near future, just to get a better understanding of some of their potential growth plans and expansion plans. I just want to report that on May 9th, in fact, I did have a meeting with a senior member of Southlake administration. I was joined at that meeting by General Manager Bejan and our Economic Development Manager, Mr. Kenny. And just to let you know that Mr. Kenny is going to act as sort of the staff champion, if you will, on the file, no different than we would with any other potential business attraction or site selection process to look at where organizations and or businesses might be expanding or looking at opportunities within EG. And we will be reporting further to you in the near future with some more updates, but I wanted to let you know that those conversations have started and are continuing.
Thank you very much. Other questions? I'm not seeing it this time. Could I have a mover to receive the verbal update? Councillor Crothers. All those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you very much. That's very exciting. There's nothing listed on the agenda for items K through O, moving us to item P, which is the adjournment. Could I have Councillor Crone? All those in favor? And that's carried at 3:32. Thank you very much. Have a stretch.